Okay, there we go. I think it's streaming. Yes. All right. So thank you so much, Charles, for again sticking through with us. This has been like the month of technical difficulties for us. For some reason, we made it like 5 months, no problem. And then September hit and suddenly Zoom was exhausted of us. So
2020 had to catch up with you at some point.
yeah, exactly. So as we wait for people to join, thank you so much again for joining us today and being willing to share our story with us. I just want to do a quick shameless plug before we get into our conversation for tonight. If you're interested, DAP is selling t-shirts in order to support Domestic Violence Awareness Month. You can get them. There's a link on our Facebook down below, or you can shop in person and grab them at Nana's Attic, our thrift store. So please, check it out and support the Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County. So awesome. We're just going to wait like another minute or two, not very much longer, because I know we're starting a little later. So we'll just let people catch up and then we'll get started. I'm very excited for the conversation that we're going to have tonight.
Yeah, I am as well.
Okay, perfect. Okay, awesome. So we have a good amount already, and I think this is great. So as everyone might know by now, my name is Veronica Lynch, and I am the Outreach Awareness Specialist for the Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County. And I am here with Charles. I don't want to butcher your name because I will never forgive myself.
No, DeLeon.
There you go, DeLeon. Perfect. And so why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself? How did we connect, and who you are?
Yeah, so I work at Children's Crisis Treatment Center. Currently, I'm the clinical supervisor for our therapeutic nursery, which is our preschool age partial hospitalization program.
Okay.
I know it's a mouthful, but basically what that means is our children technically go to a hospital, except they get to go home at the end of the day. So it's not inpatient, it's outpatient. And the way I've gotten to know your agency is that through my work over the years, I've met your executive director before she was your executive director. So we've stayed in touch, and I've been excited of the work she has been doing since she's joined the organization. And I think I told her a few times, whatever I can do to help the cause, I'm in. So maybe 2 months ago, she reached out and she said, "Hey, remember when you said anything that you can do?" So that's how I got here.
Perfect. And do you want to tell us a little bit how you got into your career? Is this something that you've always been interested in? Is this something that you've studied and got into? And what was that journey like?
Right. So for me, it was indirect. I've always been a helper. I consider myself a helper. So I knew that whatever I was going to do was going to be in service to something. I think my original plan was to be into law enforcement. So when I worked at CCTC, for me, it was supposed to be a pit stop. I wasn't going to stay long. I was working on, I'm an adult learner. So I didn't go back to get my bachelor's. So I was 28.
Okay.
So my ideal situation was to get my bachelor's and with my military experience, join the FBI. So that was my goal the whole time. It changed sometime along the way. When I initially started working at CCTC, I was in their emotional support classroom at Kensington High School. So they hired me with limited experience working with kids with trauma. And at the time, I don't think, this is 2004, I wasn't too familiar with how trauma affects children. And so for me, like most people, at that time when I saw kids misbehaving, I saw it as poor upbringing. I didn't see it as their behavior was for a cause. So really, I hated my job the first couple of years at CCTC.
Okay.
I didn't understand the work at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But oddly enough, I met this child. His name was Ray, and he was probably a sophomore when I met him. And at this point, he had graduated, so I had him for 2 years, but he was such a headache.
Mm.
At the time, he was always starting troubles, picking with the lower classmen, because in emotional support classrooms, you could have about 3 years age difference.
Okay.
So um, he was a junior messing with freshmen, and it was just, I felt like he was a bully. And I spent a lot of time with him just because I was redirecting him and trying to counsel him to go in the right direction. So anyway, I'm about to leave CCTC at this point, and move on to what I thought was my chosen profession. And then I bump into Ray, a chance meeting at a store, and he tells me that he thanks me for the time I spent with him, and um, so he was going through something, and he I used to give him all these speeches like I was like William Wallace or something, just trying to motivate him
Yeah,
to
yeah.
do the right thing. And I don't remember that particular conversation that we had, but it sounded like something I would say. And he just thanked me. And this was a kid who I really didn't think that I connected with. I didn't think that um, I touched him in any way,
Mhm.
you know. But then I go home and I start thinking about it. And what I realize is that the real work, right, is with children, at least for me. I feel like when you work with children, you're reaching them at a time where they're sponge, where they're soaking up information, where they want to learn, where they want to be pointed in the right direction. And then if I went to law enforcement, I would be on the other side of that, right? I would be interacting with them once it's too late, once they committed a crime, you know. So I figured that because I felt so unproductive originally that I wanted to leave. Um, that when I saw that I was making a difference, I decided to stay. So when I first started, long story short, when I came to CCTC, I was only a teaching assistant,
Okay.
and then I became a behavioral health worker, and I worked my way up to becoming a clinician, and now a clinical supervisor. So, and that was a 16-year journey.
Okay. Wow, that's really cool. So when did that shift between, oh, this is like just poor behavior, to I see where this is coming from, this is a result of trauma? When did that start for you?
Um, Probably so. I think that what I realized was that there were some kids who responded to um, redirection. There was no issues,
Yeah.
right? Johnny stopped doing that, and Johnny stopped doing it.
Mhm.
Was it a big deal? Then these kids that just don't, right? And um, they were combative. They were having difficulties expressing why they were angry.
Mhm.
So through school and through CCTC and through the trainings they gave me, I started to see the connection between um, the way the children were responding and why they were responding that way. And what I realized was the more patient I was, the more that I allowed them to express themselves, the more connections we made, and the less behaviors they had.
Okay.
The thing is that it goes up before it gets down.
Hmm.
So what I had to learn, and what I learned about trauma is what trauma takes something away from you, right? It takes away your power, and
Hmm.
that's what really trauma is. It's the inability to respond to whatever is going on. Um, so part of their behavior is getting that back, right? The resistance, the power struggle in children, that's what they do to get a measure of power back. And then once I start realizing that, I started taking things a lot less personal, right?
Yeah.
When I was getting cursed at, spit at,
Mhm.
in the beginning, I did take those things personal because I'm like, I'm an adult,
Mhm.
I've done things in my life and you're disrespecting me.
Like, I have my
So,
degree. I am. Yeah.
right? But yeah, once you start to realize that, and this is not, I know some people feel that this may be an excuse, right? Like we're giving them an excuse to misbehave, but we've come so far in just these last 5 5 to 10 years in understanding how trauma really works. Like with the use of the MRI machines, we can actually say definitively that we know that trauma in children rewires the brain.
Yeah. No, I
I
think
mean,
that's such a great like and strong point. And even like as adults working with kids now, it's important to see how like our trauma affects how we also approach children and how we might be talking to them in those moments of like misbehavior, whether like our own trauma. And I think when you learn about being trauma informed and seeing that you're like, oh, this is why you act like this after going through something like that, it really, you take a step back and you're like, well, then maybe that's why I act like this, you know? And then you can bring that. And it really, I think you're able to connect like a stronger connection with the children as well when you're able to see it from that perspective.
yeah, I think the interesting thing when we work with families, my upbringing, I grew up in a Christian household, and we talked about like sin is generational, right? In the
Okay.
Christian household. And you know, so is trauma,
Mhm.
right? Trauma is generational. And the way it's generational is when it's unresolved. So even somebody who means well, who, let's say the trauma is, I don't know, it was child abuse.
Mhm.
So now that I have my child, I'm gonna make sure my child's not abused, right? But because of my trauma and it's unresolved, now I'm overprotective.
Yeah.
Now I'm taking away these skills that the child needs to interact in social environments are taken away because I'm on top of them all the time.
Mhm.
Because I get triggered over things. No, you're not going to do that. And the child's thinking, well, why are you yelling at me? All I did was ask if I can go over Johnny's house.
Mhm.
So, and that does have an effect on children. The traumas that the parents have, and those things that we don't like about ourselves. They'll be like, man, I wonder how that kid picked it up. Well, he picked it up because our issues were unresolved.
Yeah.
So it's not magic, and there is some biology involved in that. I won't dispute that there isn't, but a lot of it is behavior. It's what, because children again are sponges. They can
Mhm.
absorb and they learn a lot. And they continue to do so. So if we have our issues that are unresolved, our children will grow up. Um, the odds are they'll grow up with something that maybe we wouldn't want them to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's usually when you see like those memes about like kids having the attitudes of their parents, and their parents are like, where did you get this attitude from? And you're like, well, I don't know. you know.
Yeah, yeah, it's difficult. It's that fine line where you want to. I don't think anybody becomes a parent not wanting to be better than their parent.
Mhm.
I think that, at least in my case, I felt that my mom was a great example parenting to me. My father wasn't, but I knew that if I just stuck around, I'd be better than my father, right? So the bar was real low on that side of my genes. But my mom was a nurturer. She worked hard. So, I had that. That's not to say that we didn't have she didn't have her own trauma, and um, that we didn't feel that, right? And the crazy thing is, these are things that get over it, right? You shouldn't. It happened to you when you were 10. It happened to you when you were 5.
Yeah.
You don't now. Why are you worried about it? Why it still bothers you?
Mhm.
All these unresolved issues that we're embarrassed or we feel that we shouldn't be feeling them anymore. All these things hold us back from truly being happy in our interactions with our children, with our mates, with our coworkers. It affects all part of our lives, every single part.
Mhm. Absolutely. And that's something when I work with kids myself, I work with middle schoolers and high schoolers and college and university students. But when I'm working with my middle schoolers, that's like the first thing I emphasize is that all relationships are affected by how we feel about ourselves and how we see ourselves too. And that could be because of what's going on at home and what's happening. So I always try and, open the floor to talk about beyond just who they're dating and the friend gossip. I'm like, let's talk about how do we see ourselves today, how do we feel about ourselves when we look in the mirror, and let's see how that affects how we're treating people around us too.
Absolutely. It's there's also for me there's a cultural component. I think for most minorities, always a cultural component, depending what your culture is. But in Latin culture, like you don't talk about anything outside of family, right? So any trauma is supposed to be kept in the family.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of times we just don't talk about it. It's just you pray about it, right? And you hope that it goes away. Very rarely does that work as an action um, to undo the trauma that we get. And in there lies the insidious nature of um, domestic abuse.
Yeah.
So and it's a thing, and it's one of those things in domestic abuse because the person who is abusing you, you love,
Hmm.
right? So how do you reconcile that, right? How do you reconcile that the person who, in my case, it was my father.
Okay.
My father was physically abusive to my mother. Um, he would beat my mother like she was a man. And I don't remember a lot of the beatings, but my family tells my brother is 4 years older than I was, and my mom would tell me before she passed that I would try to defend her, like I would throw shoes at him
Hmm.
and whatever I could find, I would throw it at him and curse at him. I don't remember none of that.
Okay.
I think I was too young, or maybe I blocked it off because it was just too traumatic for me. But um, I do. The thing that I do remember is that one time when they were separated, he had broken into the house, and my mom tried to defend herself with a knife, and she
Hmm.
wound up cutting herself in the process. And I remember she was bleeding, and that I remember vividly. That the blood I remember vividly. My father was also sexually abusive to me.
Okay.
Yeah, for about a year. My mom, I was about five when or four-ish when they started getting separated. I was about 5 or 6 when my father stopped coming around because my mom had split from him, and that's kind of what stopped. And as a child, I didn't tell my mom until I was 16.
Okay.
Um, and at that point, I really didn't want to talk much about it.
Yeah.
So my mom kind of left it alone, and she dealt with it later on in life. I realized she went to counseling because it was just overwhelming her what had happened and when she realized what happened to me.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, she stopped going because her therapist told her that um, the likelihood of me being an abuser was high because I was
Okay.
abused, which we know is a fallacy. But
Yeah.
um, at the time, this was the 90s, I guess. Yeah, it was
Hmm.
the 90s. And that's what, so my mom was scared to take me to therapy because of that, because she didn't want me to hear that. Um, but I didn't realize how what happened to me when I was 5 affected me through my whole life, my decision making process. I was always an emotional person, and by that I just mean I had poor regulation. I would get into fights all the time. Every little thing, every small challenge to my manhood was met with a fierce and quick response at
Hmm.
all times, and I wasn't quite sure why that was. I just know that I had to do it. There was this feeling of fear that I would feel, and I had to fight.
Okay.
And it wasn't till I am 44. Yeah, I'm 44. I always forget my age, maybe on purpose, but I'm 44 now. And when I was 35 is when I decided to go to therapy.
Okay.
And oddly enough, at this point, I started my training to be a therapist. Um, but I was good at helping people. I wasn't good at helping myself.
Okay.
That's the issue. And the reason I went to therapy is because my wife left me, and she was like, "Yeah, I can't do this no more. You don't talk to me. You don't share. Your most intimate thoughts with me. I'm done. You go to therapy. If you don't go to therapy, it's not. Don't come back."
Hmm.
So originally, I just went to therapy because I wanted to get back with my wife. And in therapy, it took about maybe 6 months, and I wasn't resisting on purpose. It was just it was too much, right? Um, the 30 years of carrying the weight of what happened to me was a lot, and it was just difficult for me to process all that. And I couldn't see it at the time. I like that, it was not a big deal. I was 5. Um, but of course, that was me deflecting, trying to kind of ease all the emotions that were flooding in me. And about 6 months in, I kind of realized, and it was like a smack in the face, how all these decisions that I've made in my life were linked to this one point in my life,
Yeah.
And as a Latin male who grew up in a Christian household,
Mhm.
uh, I couldn't talk about my sexuality. When I was a teen, I felt that there was a possibility that I could be gay.
Mm.
I figured why my father targeted me. Um, there was times where I I was a kid. I didn't know it was bad. I
Yeah.
enjoyed it. It wasn't. He was happy. I was happy. Those thoughts confused me,
Yeah.
as a teen. But I couldn't talk to anybody about that, so I just kind of held that in. Um, and the only way that the only language that I had as a kid was to fight, right?
Mhm.
And once I got older and I realized that, yeah, you just can't fight anymore. You're an adult. I just shut down.
Mhm.
I didn't speak about anything. I shut it down. Um, and I didn't realize the damage I was causing in my own family doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, there you are.
Hi. So I asked Veronica's permission to join because you have said such amazing things that we have touched on as of late with a lot of people we've communicated with. One of them being the question if children outgrow um, domestic violence. And you touched on that so perfectly. But also, as individuals who work with young people, and also for myself personally, outside, in addition to Domestic Abuse Project, we work with churches, even in our organization. And a lot of times, the stigma, along with the faith component, stifles individuals for reaching out for therapy or even allowing communication with children to be so open and fluid about their experiences or their trauma, rather. So, how were you able to break that ideology growing up in a Christian household and being a man of color? I think there's a lot of layers with that, right? And being a man of color and seeking out therapy. Of course, I'm sure your wife was complete motivation. But how did you fight through that and still be open to receiving that experience?
Yeah, and you're right. There is layers to that. It was difficult for me. I lost. I don't want to say I lost my faith for a time, but I struggled with it. I never stopped believing that God is real. I still believe God is real. Um, I just had issues with the things that were going on in my life, and I wasn't sure how to reconcile that at the point. And also, um, when I decided to go to therapy, because it was my choice, my wife kind of forced my hand, but I had to make the decision to go. I did some research and I couldn't find a lot of material for men. Rightly so, plenty for women. And a lot of materials that I used were books that were written for women because that's what was out there. Um, and that left me feeling a little bit more isolated um, than I was hoping to feel when I started my journey in healing. So that's another factor to kind of contribute to it. It's a lot easier if other people are walking those footsteps, right? When you feel like you're the only one, you really don't want to be a trailblazer. That's not what you want to do. You want to feel comfortable um, in who you are. And really, you're kind of challenging when you go to therapy, you're kind of challenging some things about yourself, right? Not all bad, but things that are painful. And honestly, you just have to, it's almost you have to relive it to get past it. And that's not as easy as we make, or when you're reading a book, right? It's not as simple as um, trauma recovery makes it. It's not as easy as Dr. Vanderkolk makes it seem, and the body keeps score. It's not that simple
Yeah.
because we're emotional,
Yeah.
right? And cognitively we could be somewhere, and emotionally we're not. So cognitively, when I went to therapy, I listen. I was a helper. I've been working with kids. I'm trauma informed. I'm working on being a counselor. I got this stuff cognitively. You got me. My therapist broke me down until she had me emotional, right? And I was wrong. And at that point is when I realized that I ain't have it together,
Yeah.
you know. And when I understood that, somehow I became stronger, right? Understanding that I didn't have the answers, understanding that I didn't have it all together, understanding that I didn't have to be um, Superman to be loved. I think men, especially men, feel like they have to be perfect when they've been traumatized, maybe sexually traumatized. Men are, we're taught to, rub dirt on it and keep going forward. And I think a lot of things that I did in my life was kind of just rubbing dirt on it. I was a pretty good athlete in high school. I joined the Marine Corps, kind of to show the fact that, I'm a man, right? Um, and all that time, I was just a scared little boy. And that's just the truth. And even to say it out loud, sometimes it hurts, right? To know that all those things that I've done prior to going to therapy was just me trying to prove that I wasn't a little boy, but I was. It was just so scary. And the fear of people finding out that I was sexually abused by my father would terrify me. Especially my coworkers and my closest friends. Like nobody knew. My family knew. That's it. If you weren't my wife, my mom, my brother, sister, you didn't know.
So
All
what
they knew
has
is
the response been from people now that they do know? So I think that's what may hold a lot of individuals, but especially men back in terms of what the outward response would be. So what has the response been like for you? So hopefully it'll break down some walls for other people.
yeah, it's been 99.9% positive. If anything, people look at me, they feel like I'm brave. They call me brave. They call me a hero. Um, these are things that I only tell to myself when I'm reading comic books. I don't aspire to be that. The only thing I ever aspired to be was competent. You know, um, but it's been different. I really, I used to walk into the room and size up the room and be like, yeah, if anything happens, I'm gonna be okay, right? Um, and I don't know when that stopped. But at some point, I just stopped walking into the room. I just sat down and didn't care who was in the room. But like I said, I work for a children's correctional treatment center, and the support that I receive from work, from the very top, the executive director, to just my colleagues, has been overwhelming. Always positive, always supporting me, allowing me to be honest about who I am and my struggles, because the trick is, right, I've gotten better at it, but once you go from not pouring your emotions out at all to opening them, you tend to overshare and it makes people uncomfortable, right? So I'm getting better at the oversharing part. Now I'm just like, okay, too much.
Yeah.
But because part of me didn't want to feel censored anymore, right? So, and I was like, and people understood that, I think, because nobody ever said, all right, that's too much. I could just tell that people were like, okay. But yeah, I think there's things that happen naturally. You get your equilibrium back, the pendulum swings back the other way, and you kind of get your footing. And it doesn't mean that everything's okay. For me, recovery, what I realized was recovery is not a destination, right? The recovery is every day, right? Recovery is that circle, and sometimes I feel great. I feel like Superman, and there's days where I don't, and those are days where I say, you know what? I'm gonna let myself sit with this for a little bit. And there's days where I'd be like, you know what? We're not even gonna go there. We're just gonna keep it going, right? Um, and these are things that you learn along the way. I honestly was heartbroken when 2 years into my recovery, I had what I would consider a relapse. My father died. And when he died, I didn't feel it at the moment. But I was 6 months later, right? My daughter was visiting her aunt down in Louisiana, and my wife and I decided to take a road trip. I said, you know what? Instead of flying her over, let's just go over there. We'll spend a week down there. We'll come back up. And I don't know, somewhere in Alabama, right? It just kind of just hit me, and the pain, the frustration, the romanticized notion of what a father should be, what he could have been, it kind of just all hit me at once. I started crying. I started beating at the steering wheel. I must have looked at the nut if anybody was driving by seeing me. But I was hurt that after, because I put my heart into therapy. I did. I felt like that shouldn't be affecting me anymore. And the fact that it can, and it has, for me, it felt like it was a setback. So realizing that I can have those moments, and it doesn't mean that I'm taking a step back. It just means that I guess what, you're human, and I'm allowed to feel those things. So I want people to know that therapy is difficult. It is, but recovery is continuous. It's every day. I do things every day to make myself feel better. When I'm brushing my teeth, I'm looking at the mirror. I do self affirmations. I do. I tell myself that I'm capable of being loved and of that loved. It makes me feel better.
We talk about that all the time too. Yeah.
It works.
Good job.
So this is kind of going back to something that you were saying earlier, and to also answer a question that was asked to us on the live, was that you mentioned how it can be very isolating as a man seeking out help from trauma and seeing that a lot of the resources are gendered. And that's also something that Nicole and I work very hard on when we're giving out education and doing that, making sure that it is as inclusive as possible. But what can organizations like ours and research, what can it do to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible for men, and to make sure that the services that we provide are the best that they can be?
Right. So I think there's always well, not always, but I think for now there's always going to be a stigma attached to a male who goes through some type of trauma, whether it be sexual abuse or domestic violence. Only because biologically men are the stronger sex, which doesn't mean much to, in some cases, we know that. Statistically, I think it's 1 in 9 men.
1 in 7.
1 in 7.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the stats, in-house stats.
Yeah. I'm looking at old stuff.
Yeah.
So our, in domestic violence situations, I think that part of making people more comfortable is kind of knowing that it's not your fault, right, that you're in this situation. For me, it's a little different. I was 5, so I could say, hey, I was a kid. I can't control it. When you're an adult and you're in those situations, it becomes extremely difficult to manage. You feel like you should be able to protect yourself, and emotionally and physically, and those things are difficult. I think part of that is understanding you're not the only one when we're talking about feeling isolated. And I think that's a big deal. Like I said, feeling like you're a trailblazer, that's not a good feeling. Yeah. Feeling like if I go to you for help, you're gonna laugh at me, right? That's not a good feeling. And then also the layer of, and not to say that it's different from the other way around, but men rarely experience the need to ask somebody for help in a situation where you feel like your life is threatened or that you're in a situation you can't escape from.
Mhm.
You know, men rarely are put in those situations. Um, so there's a stigma of feeling like you're not a man if you are,
Yeah.
you
I
know.
think, I think for men, I don't even like using gender, honestly, because I think as humans, like you stated, we're just emotional creatures in general. And I think men aren't oftentimes given the opportunity to be vulnerable and to be reflective of their emotions and their feelings because because there is some sense of expectation that society has placed on males and as people in general that that's the standard, right? And then you have individuals who are you are brave to do this because even being a trailblazer is very isolating. It's an isolating experience because people aren't used to what you're speaking on or being passionate about, and so they're like, "What is this?" But when they hear it, it's a different reception. But I think how do we even as a society, not just an organization, but as a society too, begin to be more inclusive? We're slowly but surely getting there. We have come leaps and bounds. We have so much further to go. Again, we're on this journey, right? That's never ending. But how do we, like, as a whole, again, have those vulnerable spaces available to male survivors? Because you're our only male survivor this month, but we've had phenomenal conversations with other male advocates around domestic violence. So how do we like? Are we in the right direction? How can we be bigger and better? How can we work together? You know, we're trying, but
Yeah, no, and I can see that. I think when I look at your literature, it's always it's definitely I can see that you guys are trying not to be gender specific in what you do, which is appreciated. Obviously, I think though. So I think we will get to a point where it's not going to matter. But right now, I think it's just continuing to do that, continue to have men part of the conversations, have men part of what is going on in the agency. I obviously the big push is always going to be for women and children because they're largely the victims of domestic violence by a large amount of number. So they're always going to need the most resources. But I think um, making it so you don't feel like you're excluded from having that conversation. You know, since I started, part of what I do also is as part of my recovery, right, and wanting to help those around me. I am filming a documentary on male survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
Wow.
In the process of also doing that, I started a blog, which I really shouldn't that I did because there's only a few blog posts on there. Um, but I've received a lot of emails and discussions with different men who, you know, who normally probably wouldn't be discussing these issues if they didn't run into my blog, if they didn't see um, the things I was doing on Facebook, we wouldn't have the opportunities to have these discussions. And I'm always grateful when people trust me enough to share their stories. Um, and it hasn't just been males. I thought it would be largely male, and it's been largely male. But I've always, when women contact me about the issues they've gone through as when they were little girls and being used as objects instead of as a person, it hurts just as much. It's not. It doesn't matter that it's a male or it's a female. It's we're humans, right? And when somebody's pouring a story to you, um, it's hard to um, put the right words together because it just is because you don't want to say um, that you know what they're going through because every individual is different, right? We all grew up a different way and we all see the world differently. So our pain, while you may know what it feels like to stub your toe, you know, if you had a terrible day, you know, your car got towed, You had to walk home in the rain and you stubbed that toe, that pain's a little bit different, right? So I try to get all those things in mind when I'm discussing this with
Yeah.
people, and I try to be optimistic, not positive. I think those are two different things. Optimistic is knowing that we're going to get to a point where we're going to be okay, and being positive can kind of look like corny. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, I'm struggling. I'm telling you, I'm drowning. You're telling me it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
No, it's not. I'm drowning. Right. So um, those are the kind of themes that I try, and I never try to give advice.
Mhm.
It's more, um, what they're doing for self-care. And if I feel like they need to see a professional, 9 times out of 10, I'm like, who can you talk um, to get you started on your recovery?
Yeah.
And, and there's people that I've been emailing with. I don't look for them on Facebook. I don't look for, I only know them through emails, but they email me at least bi-weekly, and we just email back and forth and stay connected that way. Um, and I always want to be like, damn, maybe I should ask if, we do like a video chat or something, but I never do. I think that when people are comfortable with that medium, and if it's helpful for them to email me and to just have discussions, and we don't always discuss heavy things. It could just be like, this is what happened this week, and cool, and those conversations are good too. I think that we don't always have to fill the time with noise. Sometimes just knowing somebody's there is enough. And I think knowing that I would be able to go to that, right, and I wouldn't be shunned is enough, and the other part of that is the individual just has to have the courage to take that first step.
Mhm.
And then you guys have to figure out, once the foot's in the door, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's going to happen. If it hasn't already, right, it's going to happen. There's going to be a man that'll come through that door, and you're going to be like, okay. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. 1 in 7. And when I read the study, it was like maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So now it was 1 in 9 when I read it. So now you telling me it's 1 in 7. It's going to happen.
And we
And
know more than that, but that's what's important. Sorry.
I was just saying, and that specific statistic refers to physical abuse too.
Mhm.
And that's also something we try to like break that stereotype of abuse is only physical, and it doesn't really talk about emotional, financial, or sexual abuse towards men. There are statistics talking about rape and like stalking, but it's again, it's like less research because whether it's the people doing the research don't believe it's an issue or whatever the bias of it and everything, but that's the information that's being publicized and pushed out there, and then it sends out the wrong idea. But there's also something that I just wanted to ask real quick too before, because I know we're kind of hitting like our time here, but you said you shared with your mom your experiences when you were 16. What was the push for that?
Oh, so, all right. So my father actually came back in our lives for a short time. Um, 2 years prior, I was 14, for about 6 months. I didn't want to see him. I told my mom I was gonna run away if he came to the house. And my mom's like, "Why are you acting like this?" And I put it all on her. I was like, "What he did to you? He tried to kill you. I don't,
Gotcha.
I can't see him." And then my siblings, if they're watching this, you guys already know I love you. It's no big deal. But they were like, "Go see Dad. He's changed. He's
Okay.
asking for you." And I didn't know how to tell him what he did to me, right? And I always knew, right? It wasn't a thing where I put it in the back of my mind. I didn't ever forget it. But as I got older, I realized what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
So he came, he left, boom, good. I didn't care. I was like, all right, bet. I don't have to see him no more. So I was coming home from school, and my mom was watching her TV show in the 90s. There was this a Spanish talk show called Cristina, and she was like big in the 90s. Like if you go to any Latin house, that thing was on. But there was a gentleman on there, and he was probably around my age, and he was telling his mother that his uncle molested him. And then I wasn't I don't know. I just wasn't guarded. I think that because I always had my guard up when I would hear stuff like that, um, the after school specials, it never affected me. It
Mhm.
really didn't. But that affected me. I think I had my guard down, and um, I just felt like I had to tell her. So I told her, and then like I never told. So I only told her that he touched me and that he wanted me to touch him.
Mhm.
But I never told her the extent of what happened because she was freaking out already,
Yeah.
right? And in my mind, I was like, well, why tell her anymore? So when she asked me if there was penetration, I told her no.
Mhm.
Um, but which um, at the time, I just felt like it was the best thing, not to tell her, because she called my grandmother, who I didn't know all that well because we weren't close to my father's side of the family, and said when she go see him, she was gonna run him over, that she was gonna kill him.
Mhm.
Um, so I was like, yeah, maybe I just won't say anything else
Yeah.
about that. We really didn't talk about it after that. She asked me a few times if I wanted to talk to somebody, and I was like, no.
Mhm.
I was like, no.
Yeah.
And then she also told me, well, so she felt like me staying quiet about was probably what's best for me. So she also told me not to tell my siblings,
Mm.
right? Um, which at the time I was like, bet I don't want to tell them. It's good. Um, but then as I got older, I'm like, why couldn't I tell them?
Yeah.
Right. So that was a different mind. These are the mind things that happen to you, right? You start to unravel things. But yeah, that's why I told.
I have like so many questions now,
Yeah.
but I have like one more I want to ask because again, your vulnerability in this experience is more than appreciated.
Mhm.
And we can still see where you had that peak of your recovery or healing process with your father passing away. I think it's really interesting to have a conversation with people to kind of help them understand how children, like how children still are strongly connected and invested in their parents who are their abusers, because there's no disconnect of like that umbilical cord in a sense kind of thing. Like they're still your parent. So
Yeah.
like how have you been able to like manage that? Like what does that look or feel like for you? Because it's still like it's you
Yeah.
said it impacted you. So like how does that work and how did it work like growing up as a child, as adolescent, and even into adulthood?
Um, as a child, I always missed him. Even though I know he wasn't good for me, even though I was scared of him. Listen, I've been scared of two people my whole life. He was one of them.
Okay.
Um, there's different fears that you have, but as far as a physical person, I was very much scared of him. He was at some point what he did to me went from being just I was okay with it to becoming violent. That's who he was. He was a violent man. So um, yeah, I thought that part of me thought that that's what a man was growing up, and me being violent, I thought it was self-fulfilling prophecy,
Okay.
um, that one day I would become my father.
Mhm.
When I have three children, they're all adults now, but when my first son was, my wife was about 9 months pregnant, and it kind of hit me that I could be my father, right? What if I see my son and I want to do what my father did to me, or like in my case, base case scenario, I'm a deadbeat dad. I just leave and abandon my family. And this was a real fear. I didn't tell anybody. I was crying. I was going. Um, Growing up, my mentor, the person who wasn't my father, was my pastor. So I was in the church and up in the pews crying by myself. I actually named my first. Well, we named our first son after him, Reverend Gage. So his name is Gage. Um, and even I didn't even want to tell him these things. It was just I kind of just took it in. But when I saw my son for the first time, I knew that nothing I was going to do anything like that. Um, and I kind of that thought kind of slid to the back and it almost disappeared. And I didn't think about it until I went back to therapy that I even had those thoughts. As I got older, I tried to forgive my father a few times, thinking that if I forgave him, I would feel better. But again, that was just me trying to um, cheat my way out of therapy, to have to work through the things and the issues that I had. I didn't see it like that at the time. At the time, it was a genuine effort. I was, I have a religious background, so that's what we do, right? We forgive, and that didn't work. I thought at one point I thought it did, but it didn't work. I actually confronted my father one time about it. Um, he was working as a manager at McDonald's down at in New York, downtown, the Wall Street, New York, and I confronted him and I just yelled at him and he acted like he didn't know what I was talking about. But I always missed having a father. And part of me has been jealous in the past of the type of parent I've been for my kids, right? I'm like, I wish I had that relationship, right? I wish I had somebody threw the ball with me, right? I wish I had somebody who went to the school with somebody best with me when I was scared, you know? I wish I had somebody waiting for me on Christmas morning, you know, those type of things. And at some point, and honestly, it was even before my father passed away, I really did find a way to forgive him. And it was me understanding that forgiveness wasn't me letting him off the hook, right? It was, what forgiveness for me is giving myself permission to move on, right? That I didn't have to carry the weight anymore, that it wasn't my fault, that I, sh- I shouldn't be mad at myself for being 5, right? All these things that I was carrying, that I was holding on to, and I was putting it on him, but he's been out of my life for decades. I was doing it to myself, right? And when I realized that, that's when I was able to forgive him. And with everything that I am, if I would have saw him anytime after that, I would have told him, listen, you can't be in my life. You can't meet your grandkids, but know that you can die and know that I don't hate you. I would have been able to tell him that. I would have. But he didn't get he chose not to have that opportunity himself. And it just at some point I just realized that that's what forgiveness is. We always think that forgiveness is about the other person, right? We always feel that way, and it makes sense, right? Somebody does something wrong to us or whatever, or we do something wrong to them, and so okay, we have to always be the bigger person, but that's not how it works. Somehow the brain, that saying I forgive you, the brain somehow process that and lets all this stuff go, and I had to be at a point in my life where that made sense. I had to be in therapy for 6 years. I've had to work hard to go through this stuff. I had to be able to communicate my emotions. I had to be able to ask forgiveness of people for the things that I did, to get to the point where I could forgive my father. And I'll be honest, there are times that I'm still scared of him. And I know we got to go real quick. So, about 2 years ago, I had a nightmare, and I'll be honest, I'm embarrassed to tell the story, but I'm gonna tell it anyway. 2 years ago, I had a nightmare where I'm a grown man the way I am now. My father is standing behind me, and he tells me to turn around. No, he's standing in front of me, tells me to turn around, pull down my pants, and I do in my dream. And then I feel this breath behind me. And I could smell it like it was him. He used to wear the Brute, Avon Brute cologne, and I just smelled it. I smelled it. And I am 43 years old, 42 years old, and I wet my bed. I wet the bed. I got up from the fear, and I wet the bed. I jump off the bed, and my wife was like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I said, "Nothing." I went to the bathroom, and I jump in the shower, and I cry in the shower. And I'm crying not because I'm scared at that point. I got up, I was ready to fight because I felt like it was real for a moment. But I was crying because I'm like, damn, even in my dream, he's got me, right? I'm like, why didn't you? Because sometimes in your dream you can control things, right? But no, that's not going to happen. But I'm like, just turn around, put your pants on. That easy, really, guy? Really? Um, if I didn't have my first, what I would consider my first step back, that would have totally destroyed me, right? Because um, yeah, it was just something that I sat with that for a while. I did. I'll be honest. It was hard for me to even in my dream to admit, that I was powerless against him in particular. Um, yeah, but the positive thing about that is that I remember happening on a Sunday, and on Monday I was at work. I was at CCTC, the partial program, working with the little kids, supervising the clinicians and the behavioral health workers. I was going by my regular day. I didn't let it stop me. And that's my takeaway, right? My takeaway is that when those times get difficult, I'm still able to live my life, right? I don't crawl, I don't ball up, I don't get fetal position and don't move and cry. I, you're able to move forward because of the work I've put in, because of the coping skills that I have, because of the work. I am able to take that type of hit, right? It's a real hit. It's a hit on your pride. I'm a grown man and I went into bed over a dream. But yeah, that's kind of how I put it. The fact that I was able to still function for me was a win. And I don't know that I would be able to do that 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago, I'd have been suicidal at that point. But like I'm 35 years old, went into bed. I probably wouldn't be able to process that the right way. So, yeah.
There's actually a quote that I really like, and it just goes directly with what you're saying. And it's like, despite it all, you are here. So I think that's like perfectly in line with what you're saying. Like things happen and we're able to live the next day and like get function, like you said. So, I mean, I think everything you've been saying and your vulnerability and honesty with us tonight is like so well appreciated and very well respected because it's not easy to share that stuff, especially on a Facebook Live. So I really appreciate what you've shared with us tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity. Happy to be here. It's not always easy to talk about this stuff, but it's always feels good to do so though.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we appreciate you. And thankfully we have Julie who connected you to us to continue to push this work. And we we look forward actually to working with you together. So you will be hearing from us very soon.
I would be happy at any point, anytime. I'll do what I can.
Yeah, you will help us in a lot of what we do as an agency, especially as educators in the schools. So we look forward to working with you in the future. Before we go, are there any last words you'd like to share with our audience before we say goodnight?
Well, life is just about, look, we all are carrying something, right? We just are. I think that what we know now is that trauma can really be anything. We've all had something in our life that weighs us down from time to time. And you know what? That's okay, right? If you have to sit with it for a little bit, that's okay. What's not okay is giving up. What's not okay is not asking for help. Um, those type of things is what holds us back from experienced life. I think ultimately there's a lot of things in life that we would want, but what we need in life is to be happy, to be happy with the people that we care about. So I think that my parting words is to be happy and do what you have to be happy. If that means asking for help, if that means working on yourself, if that means reading a book, hitting the gym, whatever you got to do.
I like that.
Saw you, girl.
Oh, okay. So thank you so much, Charles, for spending your time with us tonight and sharing your amazing words with us. I thought too, this is also a good opportunity to share that DAP has a children's counselor as well as adult counselors. So if anyone watching has children, that they feel as if they should speak to someone because they've witnessed domestic violence or are in a domestic violence relationship themselves, they can call our hotline to ask to speak to a children's counselor. And, we also have counselors for adults too. So again, you can always call our hotline and talk about that. Also, we have our shirts. So we can get our shirts on our link and in store at Nana's Annex. So that's all I have to say. Nicole, would you like to add anything?
Charles, you want to say something?
Just real quick, since you said that, I think that's important also for people to know, if they don't, that physical abuse, neglect, witnessing trauma, all those things have the same effect on children.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, not one's not worse than the other. So all those things have the same effect on the child.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well said. My parting words would be October is coming. Domestic Violence Awareness Month is here. Throughout the month of October, continue to follow us. We'll be doing amazing things, including those phenomenal shirts that Veronica is rocking. And you see, it's all inclusive, right? We have people of color. We have a male presence too. DAP is doing the thing. Shout out to our executive director.
Without just being on the show. It's on our Facebooks.
Yes, please continue to follow us on Facebook at Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County. Also on Instagram, we have, again, a lot of things coming up in the next few weeks throughout the month of October. We'll be back with you all next Tuesday evening with the rest of our Southeastern region family from the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Speaking of all the things we're doing, Domestic Violence Awareness Month, all within October. So without further ado, Charles, thank you. You are amazing. Your story is amazing. You are an incomparable being in the work that you have been doing and the work that you will continue to do, and continue to be that trailblazer, dude. We're here with you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good night, guys.